so now we'll kind of go here from the rough thumbnails to a more finished line drawing with this project. So, got the 3 thumbnails here, so let's just start with the 1 point. So I'm just going to copy and paste this to its own layer. Turn off that thumbnail layer, lock it so I don't draw on it. Okay, now I'm going to go here, call this 1 point thumbnail. And I'm just going to expand it and make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to work with. Okay. All right. That should be pretty good there. I'm going to turn down the opacity a little bit just so we lighten it up and then lock it. So what I'm going to do first is on this layer, I'm going to call this one perspective grid. And I'm going to design all the perspective grid stuff here on this layer, and then I'll make a new layer on top of that for line art. So I'll kind of go back and forth. I will be using my brush tool as well as the line tool to work on this grid. Okay, so we already defined where that horizon line is, right here. And where that one vanishing point is, since it's 1 point perspective, the vanishing point is in the picture plane. It's not directly in the center on this, so yours might be near the center, but probably don't, if you're doing 1 point perspective, you probably don't want it right out there by the edge. Somewhere kind of in this range somewhere. Okay. Now I'm going to switch to a green. That's just kind of the color I use. You can use whatever you want. To start drawing in these perspective lines. So what I'm looking at here is I want to make sure all the major shapes in this composition have go along this perspective grid here. So I know the top of the windows will be about there, so that's why I'm thinking there. The bottom of the windows will be about there. And I could have some come off in this direction. You know, I'm not really going to need it for this particular project. But, you know, maybe later on I might end up adding stuff over on this side. So it can be helpful to kind of just visualize the entire scene in 1 point perspective. All right. So yeah, so now I see, so that'll be for the edge of the roof there. Let me do a few more up here so I have that top of the tower covered. Because like I mentioned when sketching that thumbnail, you might want to sketch out this tower as a cube first and then change it into ellipses, or you can just go straight into ellipses. That's up to you, kind of what works best for your own working method. Alright, I can always come back and add more lines for that grid if need be. So this is a pretty simple grid for 1 point perspective. Obviously with 2 and 3 it'll take a little bit more time. Let's turn down the opacity just a little bit and lock that layer. I'm going to turn this one down just a little bit more. Alright. Okay, on okay, so now is the point where you want to worry about getting those big shapes down. So big shapes to small shapes. So I kind of just have all the big shapes in here in my thumbnail sketch. You know, I'll reference back to my photo reference there as I work, but I want to make sure this all gets figured out. So the big cube down here, the pyramid shape on top of the house, and the tower. I want to kind of get all of those defined first. And then after that, I will worry about smaller shapes like windows, texture on the building, and stuff like that. So I'll just start here and get the basic cube for that. So I am going to use that the hold shift to get that vertical line. I want to make sure that vertical is really accurate. So I could come in here and use the line tool if I want. That's up to you guys. But I mentioned during class, if you use that line tool too much, everything will start to feel a little bit too stiff. So I will use it in some places, kind of on those big shapes. Okay, so there's, that's the main cube right there of the building. So that shows me the front plane and the side plane where these two edges are parallel, receding to that vanishing point. Okay, so now this roof, it overhangs just a little bit, so I want this to pop out just a bit. Now these two will connect with the horizontal. This one I can follow along that grid line right there. All right. So now we can just start to connect this roof up to the top. And it will change on my from my thumbnail as I work a little bit. And it kind of helps me every so often to turn off the thumbnail sketch and the perspective grid as I'm working. Okay, so now we have this little guy on top. So this is a horizontal. This is a vertical, pretty simple. So this is basically just a little cube sitting at the top of the point of that roof. So 1 point perspective, this is just a cube, but then this will recede to the vanishing point right there. Got another pyramid on top of that cube. And anytime you can draw through, that's a good idea. So I'm just going to go ahead and erase underneath that. And it's got a flat top there. Okay, so I did not add in this little awning type thing there when I was doing my thumbnail sketch, but I know there's a front flat plane there from the that kind of schematic drawing I did earlier. So that front flat plane will go to the vanishing point. Those verticals are true verticals. And this will come straight back. And then the angle of this just follows that angle of the roof. So this angle here is going to be the same as that angle there. This will come back as well. Right to about there. So my reference photo here is pretty similar to this 1 point perspective drawing I'm doing. So it's pretty helpful just to have that there. It's a little bit different. And remember, always kind of trust your eye too as you're working. If things look off or look wonky, go ahead and adjust it. If it looks good, then it's probably going to be good. Okay, let's get our tower in there. So how should we do this tower? This is kind of a rounded ellipse, especially here at the top. But we can go ahead and add this in as a cube if that would help you guys to think about it that way. Just have a big cube stacked up there, a smaller, skinnier one for the skinnier part of the tower. Let's make this a little bit wider. Yeah, because that back edge almost lines up with the back edge of the building. So depending on how you draw, you may need to do like another, clean, really clean line layer on top of this. Or this initial line drawing you do here might be enough. Okay. So I just drew through that cube, so now I can change this to a cylinder. So I'm going to have this is an ellipse right here. Fits right inside of that cube shape. So if anyone's drawing on Procreate, they have a really good perspective guide tool, which kind of simplifies a lot of things. That's what I do for a lot of my own work now, as I work right in Procreate, because it's nice using that perspective guide tool. So I just drew this vertical line up from the center of this ellipse. I just kind of eyeballed it. If I wanted to use that X method back when it was a square, that would also work. And I'm just going to eyeball these ellipses up here on the top. It's a smaller shape, so it's less important for the smaller shapes to be like 100% accurate. You can kind of eyeball those and make sure it's working with the overall perspective. Okay, how is that looking? That's kind of all the major shapes in there. Looking at this this little balcony shape around here, I think we should just treat that as an ellipse there. It might be composed of slightly straight edges there, but we can, this is where you can interpret the image and see what works best for your own drawing. So it comes out wider than the tower here. And again, it's always based on that eye level. Am I looking up on this shape or am I looking down on a shape? And I know I'm looking up on these ellipses, so I'll see the underside of this. Alright, I drew through there, so I can then erase that other part. You can do things like if I wanted to nudge this ellipse up if it wasn't quite having the right curve, I could go filter liquefy, if anyone's used this feature before, and just zoom in here and nudge this curve just slightly. There we go. Just adjusting that curve just a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the thumbnail. So there's all the major shapes. That's kind of the major shapes of this structure. Now everything else I'm adding on are just smaller details. Okay, so it's going to be helpful. Again, big shapes to small shapes, major cubes and cylinders, and then start adding those details in. I'm just cleaning up my line work a little bit as I go. Cleaning up that drawing through. Alright, so let's turn that grid back on and use that to place in some of these other shapes. So there's that gray, this little bottom section here is gray, so I'm just going to create that here. It's a horizontal. Now let's get these doors and windows in here. This door is in perspective. Windows are in perspective. It's close enough to that grid line that I can kind of follow along that. So I'm just placing these in here. They're flat on the surface right now of this plane, but I eventually want to make these windows slightly recessed, meaning they go into that surface just a little bit. So right now they're just kind of rectangles drawn on the surface. So let's recess one of these to kind of show you what that'll look like. So they go in slightly. So this is going to come in just a little bit there, and you'll see that edge right there. And you see a little bit of that. So just giving a suggestion that these aren't just flat on the surface is basically what you want there. And some buildings will be more dramatic with that than others in different architectural elements. Okay, same with the door. It's kind of hard to see, but usually doors sit back just a little bit as well, so I'll just kind of do the same thing like I did for the windows. Alright, so we probably want these windows to line up, so I'm just going to loosely draw a line there, and then that will help me figure out the tops and bottoms of the windows on this side. These windows are easy to draw. They're just rectangles. They're not in perspective. That's that front plane of the building. So I can come and erase these guidelines now that I got the windows in there. So now what's nice is if I do draw some stuff on here for the windows, so kind of design that shape above it. This is where you can invent that shape a little bit if you want, or if it's hard to see exactly what it looks like in the reference photo. So it's nice now, I can just go here and grab this, the lasso tool. Lasso tool is L. Just copy and paste this. I switch to my selection tool and hold Option on a Mac. I think it's Control if you're on a PC. And now I just redid that part. So any chance, especially with architectural stuff, if you can copy and paste, that will save you time. Okay, let's see how it's looking. All right, now it's coming together nicely. So all the major shapes in there are in perspective. I want to go in and add more of those details, so add the little decorative elements above these windows. And I don't even have the grid on here at this point. I'm just kind of sketching this in, using my eyeball, trying to see what looks good. I'll turn that grid on to help me draw these horizontal lines, but they're very close to the horizon line, so there won't be much tilt up or tilt down in these. And here, again, I don't know exactly what's on this doorway. It's hard to see in the reference photo, so I'm just going to put like a window shape up here on the top half of the door. Hits the horizon line there, so that would be just horizontal. And a few kind of simple shapes to suggest a door handle of some sort. If this was a, more involved project rather than an exercise, I would, research a specific cool type of door handle to use for that. Okay, we want some stair shapes in here. I got some stairs leading up there. I do want to put a little bit of depth on this, so this is a three-dimensional shape for this. I'm imagining this is like a thin piece of wood cut out there, so I do want to have that little edge there and here, so those have some depth to it. Zoom out. So now that's looking pretty good. So basically what I will do now, I will kind of do the same thing for these windows up here. Any sort of pattern I see up here. So there's a lip there below that tower. Be a little more careful with that curve. There we go. This pattern here. So architecture, drawing that architecture is a lot of time just kind of drawing patterns. So pattern there. Exaggerating that lip that hangs out. Okay, I'll just kind of leave it there for now. We'll get into some of these other things. So things like the roof texture, I do want you to include some of that. But you don't have to draw out every single shingle. No, you don't have to do that. What I would suggest is kind of doing what I call lost and found pattern. Lost and found texture. Suggesting that texture throughout here. I would add in some grit and some grime and some dirt there as well. Same with over here. There's a little bit of a cap on the top tip there. You do see it on the points of these roofs. So the more you draw these buildings too, like I'm used to drawing houses and buildings, and right on the pitches of those roofs, usually the shingles kind of, you know, bend right over that point. But it's a lot easier to just come in and sketch all this stuff now because I have that overall, the overall perspective of the big shapes figured out. Little rectangle in here. You know, and I do like these, like the little drain pipe that comes down here. I really like these details. These are when I start talking about those storytelling details. This stuff is what creates that engaging and interesting storytelling image, drain pipes, wires, electrical boxes, things like that. So this is stuff that you can borrow when you start to invent your own environments. You're like, oh, I need a drain pipe here. I need a gutter hanging off. Whatever it may be, this is where you get inspired by real life to hopefully make your invented drawings more interesting and have that sense of story in there. Okay, so I'll stop the video here and then I'll do the next one for 2 and 3 point as well.